I think we're live, everybody. Hi, everyone. Welcome to P&P Live. My name is Beth Wong, and I work in events for Politics and Prose. Even though the dugouts are empty down in Navy Yard this evening, it is baseball night in DC. We are so excited to bring you Keith Law and Sean Doolittle this evening to talk about Keith's new book, The Inside Game. A couple of things before we start. At any time during the event tonight, you can click on that green button below to purchase additional copies of tonight's book on P&P's website. We are currently offering reduced rates on shipping as an incentive, especially as our physical stores are closed and we need those purchases in order to keep bringing you this kind of programming that P&P is known for. I know everybody in attendance tonight bought a book as part of their admission, but we're all either missing baseball right now or know somebody who is, and I can confirm that these books make a really great gift. Tonight, you can ask the author and moderator a question by clicking on Ask a Question, which can be found near the bottom of your screen. There are already 7 in there. I can't wait to go through those. You can read other people's questions and even vote for the ones you'd like to hear the most by clicking on that box as well. A reminder that unlike our in-person events, the speakers, myself, and the other audience members cannot see you through the screen. We welcome you tonight in your PJs, in your Washington Nash footy pajamas, whatever. We're glad you're here. On to the main event. In this groundbreaking book, Keith Law, baseball writer for The Athletic and author of the acclaimed Smart Baseball, offers an era-spanning dissection of some of the best and worst decisions in modern baseball, explaining what motivated them, what can be learned from them, and how their legacy has shaped the game. Keith is joined in conversation tonight by Sean Doolittle, avid reader, independent bookstore enthusiast, and pitcher for the world champion Washington Nationals. I'm so honored and excited to welcome Keith and Sean. Hey, guys.
Hey, thanks for having us.
Hey.
Absolutely.
Thanks for having me.
All righty.
So where should we start?
Well, do you want to get into a little bit of the background of this book and a little bit of the processes that kind of went into coming up with the idea for this?
Sure, that seems perfect, and we'll just kind of go from there. And obviously, you said you're partway through the book already. Anything?
Yes.
Obviously, that caught your fancy, and obviously, we need to talk about some fantasy and sci-fi before we turn this over.
I'm always down for that.
I figured. Yeah, I'll just talk a little bit about the genesis of the book. It's the real start of this for me was about 6 years ago. Sigmish Dahl, who now worked for the Astros at the time, he's now the assistant GM for the Orioles. He said every time they hired somebody to work at the Astros, they brought someone in, they asked them to read Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is a book I refer to constantly here. Kahneman won a Nobel Prize in economics for his work in behavioral economics, which I always sort of joke it's how people are actually irrational. I don't know if I know you did psychology in college. If you took an economics class, like, man is rational. Man always makes rational decisions. Yeah, that's not true. That is so clearly not true today.
We're not nearly as rational as we think we are.
No, oh my God, we aren't. And Kahneman and Tversky and those guys, like they built this whole subfield of economics about why, like, systemic ways in which we're irrational. And that book just spoke to me. I loved it. I remember finishing reading it. I was going to scout Tyler Kolek, the high school kid down by Houston, who was like, the thing I remember most is he was at least 6 inches taller than anybody else on this high school team. That's probably, there's got to be some kind of record or something. But that book describes a lot of the same kinds of cognitive biases that I'm talking about here in a bit more academic prose. But the book was, not only did I love the book, it sort of launched me into learning more about all of these biases, reading as much as I could on cognitive biases and illusions, and thinking about where else can I apply this stuff in my own writing, especially if, like, knowing that major league teams were thinking about these things, then I should think about these things. It's my job to cover the teams. I need to try to keep up as much as I can. And then also just in my own life, like personal major financial decisions, or comes up a lot. I think about voting, which obviously a thing this year. Maybe people should do that. Maybe they should choose differently this time. Just saying. So anyway, about a year and a half ago, I had this idea. Maybe I can write a book that takes all these concepts and explains them in a very mass audience sort of way. Because Kahneman's book is great, but it's dense. And I had a lot of readers over the years come back to me and say, you like this book? Is it, I had a hard time getting through it. And I realized I have a little bit of an economics background, so maybe that wasn't fair. I wasn't recognizing that I already knew some of his language, and that may not be true for everyone. So my idea was, can I marry these two and then also just tell fun baseball stories? Like I love going back and talking about old drafts or old trades and sort of why did this work and this one didn't work, and found a way to marry the two. And I was very, very fortunate too. My editors at HarperCollins said yes right away. They liked working. They liked how the first book did and wanted to work with me again. And I'm very, very grateful that they said, yes, this concept works. Let's go right into it.
The first book being Smart Baseball?
Correct.
Which I blurbed for everybody watching. I blurbed. My name's on the back of the book, which I'm really proud of.
Yes, you should be. You're in some pretty good company there, right?
Full disclosure. Yes. I'm very proud of that.
Yes. I'm very grateful for your support on both books now.
One of the things that I liked about this book is, I kind of read it through the lens of a player and trying to understand maybe a little bit more of why front offices and, decision makers at the top level of some of these clubs make the decisions that they do. But what I also found really fascinating was some of the ways that I fall victim to some of these fallacies and biases when I'm trying to evaluate my own performance objectively. As a player, you're constantly trying to make adjustments and get better. And one of the hardest things to do is to look at yourself in the mirror objectively, really, truly, and honestly objectively, and not try to rationalize away, bad outcomes or, chalk things up to bad luck. There are so many reasons why things happen the way they do. And standing at my locker after I've blown a save, trying to answer these questions, there are some times where, outcome bias, the outcome was very unfortunate for me and for my team. But my process was good. Sometimes it just doesn't go your way. Sometimes it's the reverse, where I got away with some stuff. I really didn't pitch very well.
Right.
But there's still an S next to my name, and there's still a W for us in the win column. But if I'm going to be effective over the course of a long season, I still have to be able to objectively evaluate that outing and take away something from it, good, bad, or indifferent. And I feel like not just in baseball, but in life, that's one of the hardest things to do is to be honest with yourself sometimes and be truly, truly objective in your thought processes and in your thinking.
It's funny, as you were talking to, I was reminded, did you ever get to talk to Harvey Dorfman before he passed away, or have you read any of his books? I met him a couple of times.
The mental ABCs of pitching. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it seemed like it'd be right up your alley, actually. Yeah. I talked to him a couple of times. The Blue Jays had him come in. Roy Halladay adored Harvey.
That was his Bible.
Yeah. And so that was, I think, really part of the connection. And so I talked to Harvey a few times just because he was interesting, and he was a chatty person, which I appreciated because I could just listen to him talk. But we really talked shop. I wasn't a player, so there wasn't a lot to discuss. But I remember him saying to me how he would try to tell pitchers, it's very much what you just said. The pitch, it didn't work, right? The hitter got a hit, got hit a ball hard. Did you make your pitch though? Did you execute the portions of this that you could control? How did your delivery feel? Did you get to your release point? All of those steps that lead up to the thing you can't really control, which is what the hitter did. And I never thought of it at the time. I didn't know what outcome bias was anyway.
Right.
But that's kind of what he was describing, is that separation of process from outcome. Well, you can't really control the outcome as a pitcher.
Right.
But you can control your process. And obviously he working as a psychologist, his thing was, if you controlled your process, you can feel good about it. If you didn't control your process, that's different. And then you have work to do and you can make your adjustments. But understanding that process outcome dichotomy and that they may not necessarily always align, I think is hard for a lot of people. It's hard for, everybody in our daily lives. It's so frustrating. I did everything right. Why didn't this work? Right? I do it in cooking, and I do it in house repairs, and I especially do it in house repairs. It's actually probably a process problem, but I'm not going to admit that. But that's right. We do that all the time. Why didn't this work? Instead of recognizing you can have a good process and still get the wrong and undesirable outcome.
Right. And you allude to a couple chapters later, you shed some light on, the volatility of being a relief pitcher. And
Mm-hmm.
I think like part of that has to do with small sample sizes, which you
Oh
also
yeah.
get into in this book. But I also I took some comfort in it. I thought it illustrated just how difficult relief pitching was. So I appreciated that.
I think the way you guys
But
are used too, also, like you're often asked to pitch on no rest. Sometimes I don't know, not speaking to you personally, but relievers are often asked to pitch 3 days in a row. Well, that's incredibly taxing on your body, especially how hard you guys throw. Everyone throws at this point. You're not necessarily going to be effective the second day or the third day. And being asked to do that just a couple times in a season can kind of throw off your entire season stats, especially with the small samples that you're dealing with. So there's natural volatility there we don't see for starters.
Right. So I appreciated that part as a reliever. But one of my favorite parts about this, and you talked about it earlier, was just going back and reflecting on, some events that have happened throughout baseball history. The 1941 baseball season with Joe DiMaggio and Ted Williams. Joe DiMaggio, his 56-game hit streak, which he rides to the American League Most Valuable Player Award, even though Ted Williams hitting 406 was a much more valuable player. And obviously the WAR stat was not a thing in 1941. But so I would just kind of want to get into a little bit over the way that we've started to look at evaluating players more objectively rather than just using maybe a sexy stat like batting average or a home run total.
Right. And I kind of had to wait to write this book or that chapter till after my grandmother had passed away, because she would never have forgiven me for saying that Joe DiMaggio shouldn't win. He was a Yankee and he was Italian. He could do no wrong. There was no escaping. So that season always fascinated me too, because when you and I were talking beforehand, it was sort of that, wait, Ted Williams didn't win that year? You look at his stat line, what?
That was news to me.
Right?
Yeah.
What was interesting was that was the chapter. I wrote that kind of early on, I think. That was the chapter that sent me to the library in downtown Wilmington here in Delaware. And I got lucky. I got a baseball fan. She was working behind the counter. And when I said what I was looking for, she was like, I'm yours. What do you need? And
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was great because we were trying to think through different newspapers that might have coverage of the MVP race, especially. Thinking New York and Boston, of course, but, what other papers might have something different, or tried to get both the AP and the UPI wire stories. Because at the time, they didn't make the balloting public. So it's just, well, what did people say? Did anyone think this was weird that Ted Williams had this incredible season and didn't win? It was interesting how much of the contemporary coverage was just about the hitting streak. DiMaggio won. He had the hitting streak. And when I went backwards from there in time a little bit too, you could see how much extra coverage DiMaggio got, even beyond the sports pages, because of the hitting streak. And that's what led me to what is ultimately my own speculation, whatever it is, 80 years later, that maybe it's just that they heard DiMaggio's name so much more, and it was always in a praising context, that when it came time to actually fill out the ballot, well, how could you not put DiMaggio first? I've been hearing for 6 months how great DiMaggio was. He had this hitting streak. It was an amazing hitting streak. It was just like his name was always right there. If somebody asked you, quick, who had the best season in 1941, and you were living that, you'd have to think twice before saying anyone other than DiMaggio. I wasn't there, and obviously we can't ask any of the voters now, but I tried to interpret from the coverage and see if that's how it played out, and it did. There was really not much in terms of defending Williams. It was sort of, hey, he was great, but does he really, he did not have the great season that DiMaggio had.
That's wild.
Yeah. That was fun.
And then
fun to research.
The 1987 season, Andre Dawson winning the MVP, even though, his team finishes in last place, and according to WAR, he probably wasn't even one of the top 10 most valuable players in the league that year. Which, it's weird to think of a guy that hit what he hit that year, and I'm trying to find his stats up here. I want to say he hit almost 50 homers.
I think it was 47 or 49 home runs. It was
well over 100 RBIs.
Yes. But a very low, relatively speaking, on base percentage. But at the time, people didn't think like that, right? There was no, other than the Bill Jameses of the world who were completely outside the industry. There was nobody to point out, well, his on base percentage is well below average, for example. That was fun also because I lived through that. I was 14. I turned 14 that year. So I at least remembered a lot of the news coverage of him not getting a contract due to collusion, or the real controversy was, should somebody win an MVP award on a last place team? And I think he was the first to do that. And it was seen as, very unorthodox, at least, if not outright heretical. How could you be valuable if you're on a last place team? Those were the conversations people had about Dawson, not was he actually all that valuable. It was just assumed he led the NL in home runs and maybe in RBIs, or was close in RBIs, and therefore, of course, his performance was worthwhile.
He led in homers and RBIs. 49 homers, 137 RBI.
Yes, which is impressive. Absolutely. Yeah. Even in the rabbit ball year, it was still very impressive. Yeah. But I don't remember and could not find, when writing this, when I went back, could not find contemporary coverage in a regular media arguing, no, somebody else should have won it. Even though Tony Gwynn, who obviously is one of the most revered players of the last 30 or 40 years, he would have been a much better candidate. Eric Davis, who personal favorite of mine, just because he was so fun to watch. One of the great
30 guy that year.
Oh my God. He was one of the great what if players. If he just stayed healthy, would he be in the Hall of Fame? I kind of feel like he would be. Those guys would have been much more deserving. It's not like they weren't famous. They were not hurt like that. It's not like they weren't very well regarded as players, but Dawson had this narrative that followed him, and you could see it in news coverage the whole year. People kept bringing up the blank check and collusion, and it came up, and then you could see in the
bigger
coverage,
market team too.
Yes, and playing for the Cubs.
Also,
I think really helped him. Absolutely helped him, and you could see that in the coverage at the end.
Yeah. Do you think if we changed the name of the award to like most outstanding player, it would be voted on differently? Or if because if you want to go by value, maybe then does that go to the player that helped get his team maybe into the playoffs or over a hump? But most out, because it should be the player who had, in my opinion, the most out season. He had the best individual effort in the league, right? But those sometimes can be two different things.
Well, there are a lot of people who vote who make exactly that argument, right? That they want value for that award to be tied to team performance. And that's not how I vote personally. I do agree that if you change the name, it would probably get rid of that. But I'd also be curious how it would play on your side. What do players actually think of that? Like if you're a player, you've played on teams that have been good and less good, teams that have gone to the playoffs and not. And, how did they perceive that? If you say he was valuable in the context of the award or otherwise, do players tend to tie that to how the team is doing as a whole?
I would say significantly less than writers have seemed to, because the award that we vote on, we vote for most outstanding player. That's the one that we vote on, and that's how it's phrased. And so I think most guys, after playing, we vote usually mid-September, I think, and after 5.5 months, we have a pretty good idea of who the best players that we played against were. And I don't think team win-loss record factors into it too much. I think evidence being, Mike Trout probably gets the most votes every year. I think there was a year or two where he won that award as voted on by the players, but didn't win the MVP award, finished second or third in the MVP award. So I think players tend to pick who they think is just the best, most talented player. At least that's my perception of it.
That's interesting. I've actually not asked very many players at all about that. I've asked front office people, and to my surprise, even people who in front offices who I would think of as more analytically inclined were actually just as likely to say, no, team value matters. Or, I know when it came up, because it's actually one of the years you were just talking about where Miguel Cabrera beat out Mike Trout. And Cabrera's team had gone to the playoffs, and one of those 2 years he won the Triple Crown. So I started just asking executives I knew particularly well, who would you voted for? And it was kind of close to 50-50. I thought they were all going to say Trout. Obviously, I thought they were all going to agree with me, right? Because clearly I was right, and they should just say what I thought. But I was very surprised how many of them actually said Cabrera. And it was kind of an eye-opener for me, too. It's like, well, maybe I shouldn't, I should rethink how I'm framing this. It didn't change what I thought about who I'd vote for, but clearly I'm framing this as if this is something people would just accept if I put it out there. It's no, actually, you need to kind of understand that you need to understand your audience, right? If people aren't going to just automatically accept the argument you put in front of them, you need to make your argument better. That's a you problem or me problem in that case,
right?
As opposed to, look, I still think the results were wrong and Trout should have won, but clearly there was something that I was not expressing when I was trying to make those arguments, because there were plenty of people who were kind of like-minded to me who would have voted for Cabrera if they'd had the ballot.
Right. And that's kind of goes back to that season that we talked about, 1941. Cabrera wins the Triple Crown, and that's like the cool thing that you can point to.
Yeah.
Afterwards when you say like he won the MVP because he was the Triple Crown winner, like Joe DiMaggio won the MVP because he had this 56-game hit streak. And there's that. I don't know what the name of the bias is, but it's like that's the example that you can that you remember most off the top of your head. And you can point to it. You can put your finger directly on that line of his stats and say, this is why he did it. And sometimes there's a little bit more, you got to dig a little bit deeper. And to go back to how players view things, one part of this that I found fascinating, and I apologize, I've been referencing things in the first half of this book. I'm only halfway done, but so far I absolutely love it.
Thank you.
Is the myth of protection in a lineup.
Mm-hmm.
And this was news to me, that the idea of a player having protection in the batting order is a myth. There's actually no data. There's no statistics to really back that up. And I started thinking about it, and I thought about it for me as a pitcher, the way I would attack a guy knowing who's on deck. Mm-hmm. And I started thinking about it because hitters swear that this exists.
Yeah. Yes, they do.
Managers swear it exists. It's a huge reason why they put their lineup together the way that they do. Mm-hmm. To which you say that the best hitter should hit second, which I actually agree with. But some teams have done it. Mm-hmm. But most teams still don't. They still hit their best hitter third.
Yep.
I think a lot of it also maybe depends on the construction of your roster. Mm-hmm. I love the way that we did it. I don't know what the numbers say, but having Turner and Eaton ahead of Soto and Rendon. Yep. I don't think you could have drawn it up better, at least based on how their skill sets complement each other. Mm-hmm. But I was thinking about this myth of protection, and I was like, as a pitcher, I don't know if it's different for starters, but I don't pitch differently depending on who's at the plate versus who's on deck. Mm-hmm. Maybe it has to do with how. So I was like, maybe there isn't a myth, because hitters swear that they get better pitches to hit.
Yep.
Based on who's behind them. And it's as a pitcher, I don't want you to get on base.
Right.
I still need to get you out in order to face that guy. The last thing I want to do is face that guy with you on base.
Right.
Is risk walking you or falling into a hitter's count, because I know I have to get you out before I even start worrying about the guy that's on deck. Mm-hmm. And so I said, because at first when I started reading it, I was like, oh, I don't know about this. There absolutely is protection. That's a thing. Mm-hmm. And then the more I started thinking about it, I was like, shoot, maybe not. And there's a lot for people that are going to read this book. There's a lot of this in here where Keith presents something and you're like, oh no, that's definitely a thing. And then a page later, you're like, you're like, oh man, like I never thought about it that way. And that's why I like reading this book.
It's interesting hearing that from you too, because I don't know how many fans know this, but you were also a pretty good hitting prospect once upon a time. I absolutely remember seeing you as in college and Team USA hitting.
I protected Ryan Zimmerman in the lineup.
Nicely done.
UVA. So for anyone,
it was real then.
Protection is sometimes real, and he rode the protection that I gave him to the 4th overall pick in the draft in 2005. A lot of people may not know that.
Yeah,
I remind him every day.
He should pick up lunch a few times for you, right? You were clearly responsible for his success. Yes,
he has. He's been more than generous.
Good. Yeah, that it's funny you mentioned like hitters believe it's true, managers believe it's true. I get it from scouts. One of the things like this, a lot of scouts it's funny. Scouts particularly listen to my book as an audiobook because of course they're in the car all the time, and then I'll see them at games as a typical year I'm out seeing draft guys or something, and when I talk about protection, it's one of the number one things they'll come back to me. It's like, that's a thing. That is absolutely a thing. I'm like, okay. It's actually not, but okay. We don't have to fight over this. But it's, people have looked a lot of different ways to try to find protection, or the idea of the hitter who is a clutch hitter, is consistently a clutch hitter. And if it's there, we can't find it. The effect is so small. It's evading our measurement. So we shouldn't think differently, right? We should not have a different process when the thing that is supposed to exist, we can't. Like I said, I prefer to just say it doesn't exist, but it's more technically accurate to say it might exist, but it's so small we can't detect it. So we shouldn't think differently. You shouldn't pitch differently based on who's on deck. If it's Mike Trout on deck or if it's Joey Bag of Donuts on deck, you're probably going to pitch the same way or close to the same way, because and especially as a reliever, I would assume, just get the next hitter out. You don't know how much longer you're in the game. So you may just say, I'm getting the next hitter out no matter who's coming up after.
Right, because the last thing that you want to do is face that guy on deck that's supposedly providing the protection.
Right.
Is face that guy with the other guy on base.
Right.
So, like, to use Mike Trout as an example, like I remember when I was matching up with those Angels teams when I was still in the AL West, the last thing that I wanted to do was have to navigate the part of the lineup that had Pujols and Josh Hamilton with Mike Trout on base, like, because then like a base hit, like Mike Trout scoring from first, he's so fast, like, and it's like you have to take each guy as their own immediate matchup without worrying about the context. I do think you're right. I do think there are probably times where pitchers fall into that trap and they might think about it too much. They get outside their game. So I think it does happen. But like, in my experience, maybe, and again, I'll preface this, maybe it is different because I'm a reliever and I pitch different. Relievers pitch differently than starters, but that guy that's at the plate has to get 100% of your attention, or else you're opening Pandora's box.
The first time I ever heard someone in baseball, like in my baseball career, explain protection, the line of protection myth to me, it was this idea, well, if the guy on deck is, Barry Bonds, that would, at the time, he would have been the guy. The hitter before him, well, you don't want to walk the guy before him and give him a free base runner, so you're going to throw him more fastballs. Like, isn't that what the hitter wants? I mean, I'm not a player, right? But I would think, like, if the hitter thinks I got a better chance of seeing a fastball, that's probably what the hitter wants to hear. Or if you're going to throw him more strikes because you're more concerned about walking him, well, again, that's to the hitter's advantage, especially if the hitter knows this or can deduce that's your strategy now. You're probably giving him a better chance to put the ball in play and maybe put it in play hard enough to have a better chance of a hit. I could never quite follow the logic all the way down. It seemed like it broke down somewhere. And I was always aware too, as a non-player, maybe there's something I'm missing in here. But then when I kept seeing also published work online that said we can't find the existence of protection. It's like, all right, I feel like, but now this is starting to come together now. I don't get the idea, and also the data says it's probably not there. I'm comfortable with this. And if the data changes someday, like, fine, but we haven't found it yet.
I do think that in this instance, when we talk about protection, and then there's a big chapter in this book about streaks and riding the hot hand.
Yep.
There are parts of these that, while there is no data to support them, it very much exists in the minds of players, which I think you can't discount the way that will improve your confidence level at different points during the season. If you're a hitter and they shuffle the lineup around and now I got Juan Soto hitting behind me, I might feel just maybe a little bit better going into that at bat. And that might be the difference to make you think like, oh, I got this protection now. Let's go. Like, I'm ready.
Yep.
Or if like you're a relief pitcher and you've had like a good like 5-6 outings in a row, like, you know, the manager says you're the closer, we're going to give you the ball, we're going to ride the hot hand. Like, I mean, it makes you feel good, so you take the mound with more confidence. But at the end of it, like, the thing that's important to remember is like, you kind of are who you are as a player, and like, you're going to either regress or progress to like your mean over the course of the season.
As you're talking too, I'm thinking like this is some like science fiction idea, but imagine if we could like have an fMRI machine on you guys as you go to the plate or you go to the mound too. Like, what's really, you know, this stuff is all happening in your brain, right? Because what you're talking about, confidence, it's a thing we scout for the lower levels.
Right.
When we see guys in high school or college, and a guy, particularly, we're looking for guys who maybe aren't confident, or there's some really like sexist and ableist language used for that stuff, but saying that a player is maybe softer mentally is probably a gentler way to say it. And like, I can't deny that that's probably a thing at some level. It's so hard to measure. And then I think sometimes, I mean, I'm like getting way out of the scope of the book too, but just like as somebody who goes to try to see players, like, I often think I'd like to know if that's real in this case, but I can't. And I made this mistake too with Gio Gonzalez, where I saw him multiple times as a minor leaguer just wilt, just totally melt down, because one instance there was a double play not made and they got no outs, and suddenly he lost the strike zone. I was like, that kid's soft. I mean, it's like he's got like 10 years in the big leagues now, right? I think I whiffed on that one. Obviously, he wasn't that soft. But, you know, it's so, I mean, this is basically a makeup conversation. And I find this stuff so interesting because I think it does matter. Like, a player's character in those senses, it really does matter. And we're probably not very good at measuring it, certainly not doing it in any objective fashion.
Yeah, because there's quotes in this book that are from players who were being interviewed by like their team's beat writers, and they're like, oh yeah, absolutely, like the hot hand is real. And like, if you had asked me before I read this, I would have said yeah, because of the way that a player internalizes like a good month, or like even like a good week, like at the plate for hitters. Like, you know, they're walking around the locker room different, you know, like you come in like after, like, you get a couple saves as a reliever in a week, and like all of a sudden, like, you're walking around like you're Trevor Hoffman, and like that very much changes like the level of confidence that you play at, whether we want to admit it or not. It does. So like, but when it comes to making decisions, again, the angle of this book is about like the way that like teams are managed and some of the strategy that goes along with it. I see the argument that it probably shouldn't matter that much when you're making decisions that are going to affect how you're going to play the game. And a perfect example of this, I thought, was Howie Kendrick last year with the Nats. He hit the ball so he was so good for us that it would have been really easy for somebody to say, that guy's got to be in the lineup every day. That guy has to play every day. He's hitting 340 and it's July. Like, he's getting on base. Look at these peripherals. This guy has to be in the lineup. But he had the veteran presence, and he was objective enough and honest enough to say, I can't play every day. My body can't handle it. If you want the best version of me, keep me available off the bench
Yep.
I can be that pinch hit. I can be that guy that comes in the seventh to pinch hit for you, and I can play. I can start maybe 3 to 4 games a week, but that's how you're going to maximize my talent. If we truly were going to try to ride the hot hand with Howie, maybe he gets burned out by May or June, and he's not there for us in the playoffs when we absolutely needed him. So that was what came to mind when you mentioned that, like being able to still think objectively and not get caught up in, I guess, recency bias is essentially what it amounts to.
And that's really interesting. I didn't know that about Howie saying that, but he probably like he did the team a favor in multiple ways. One is just obviously keeping himself healthy, like knowing his own body and having the sort of wherewithal to say, look, I can't hold up under this workload, but if you give me this much workload instead. But also, like, to your point, you sort of said this in passing, as telling that story too, that the problem with the hot hand is not believing it exists versus denying it exists or whatever. It is that if that changes your decision making, that might be a problem. And just what you said, like you would say, he's hot, we have to have him in the lineup every day. And it's, well, wait, now you're changing your lineup based on the illusion of right. It's baseball players. I often use the coin flipping example. Baseball players are not coins. Obviously it's not quite the same, but if you flip a fair coin 100 times, you might get a streak of 10 heads in a row. That just happens. Like, Mike Benjamin, I think, still holds the record for the most consecutive at-bats with a hit. Like he went 13 at-bats in a row or something like that with a hit. It's Mike Benjamin. It's not Tony Gwynn, right? It is not right. It's not the guy you would think it was. Right. And so that always, I remember when that happened too, I'm like, wait, that guy, nothing against Mike Benjamin, just sort of, I didn't think it would be you. I thought it would be him. Right. So do you change your whole lineup and say, we got to have Mike Benjamin in the lineup every day? He's literally 10 for his last 10. And then when it was over, he went right back to being the player he'd always been, perfectly cromulent big leaguer. And so it's when you start changing the process based on information or a belief that isn't actually real, and you're ignoring, like it's recency bias. You're ignoring the whole body of work that says, no, this is the player Mike Benjamin is, and this is how you should use it. And it's very easy to get caught up in that. The thing that just happened that was particularly, for you is Howie Kendrick. How many games in a row do you see Howie Kendrick just come up to the plate 3 times and smoke 2 balls? How would you not think this guy's like, he's turning into Tony Gwynn right before our eyes? You want it to be true, probably. Right. He's, and to put it in a way that I know you love, he's a professional hitter. Okay? Yes. No, but I know you how much you love that term. But so much of what can happen, but from riding the hot hand, is you say, like, all right, this guy's 10 for his last 12. He might be a left-handed hitter, but they have a really tough lefty on the mound tonight. Yes. But I think he's been hitting so well that he's able to he's up to the challenge. I think he's been swinging it so good that even though this is a terrible matchup on paper, we're going to go with our gut, and we're going to. So what happens is the pendulum can swing all the way back the other way, because you get and that hot streak can be over just like that, because now this guy's in a funk because he struck out. He was 0 for 4 with 4 strikeouts against this guy and it just put him in a slump. And now he's like, what just happened? Right. He faced Patrick Corbin suddenly, and it was, wait, what? Yeah. That's right. I mean, that unfortunately, like that's the volatile nature of the game. And when we get in trouble, like trying to predict things, based on very short recent events, when like you argue in this book, like you can learn a lot more by looking at like a longer track record. Right. And it's, you haven't gotten to this chapter yet. Towards the end, I actually talked to Alex Anthopoulos about when he gave Jose Bautista the 5-year contract extension after basically one good season. And I worked with Alex too, so it was very easy for me to call him and say, how'd you do that? Right. That's like, how did you know that was going to be a good decision? How did you know you weren't falling for recency bias? And Alex, to his great credit, kept saying too, like, we didn't know. We really didn't. We were constantly worried that that's what we were doing. But then he walked me through the whole decision-making process, all the types of information that they gathered to try to make sure that they weren't falling for that.
Mm-hmm.
They had exit velocity data at a time when that was basically brand new, and they had identified specific mechanical changes and approach changes that Bautista had made, one of which he credited actually to something Vernon Wells said to him. Vernon Wells was kind of like mocking him in the clubhouse one day and said, why don't you just like get started a little bit earlier and just hit the ball as hard as you can? I'm paraphrasing. It was a great story. And knowing Vernon a tiny, tiny bit too, I could like hear it in his voice too. But Alex said, we gathered all that information. Still, we worried we were falling for the most recent data, but we felt like we had this preponderance of other information that pointed to this being a good deal. We at least could feel like our process was sound. If this turned out to not be the right decision, we might regret it, but we could feel like we did everything we could to make this a better decision. I thought that was a great story. Alex was so candid, and a great lesson for just sum up a lot of what I'm trying to say in this book. It's why it leads that particular chapter, because he just focused on, let me make the process the best I possibly can. And then it's almost like my boss in Toronto, JP Ricciardi, would say, like, could you put your head on the pillow at night knowing you did the best you could? That's what that was. And Alex and his group could at least, they probably were terrified at the amount of money they'd committed, but they could at least put their heads on the pillow and say, we did it.
Right.
We did our homework.
Right.
Yeah, and then it worked out, which makes it an even better story, obviously.
Right. The small sample size thing is the one that probably grinds players' gears the most, because we kind of feel like it's used both for us and against us. So like especially as like a reliever, right?
Yeah.
Like if we resume this year and I go out and I put up a sub-1 whip with a FIP that's like way under 3 or what, I don't even know. I forget what a good one is, like a 2.
Yep.
And I'm going to be like, look what I just did. Do you like, oh, look at that FIP. Like, look at all these peripherals. And like, there are still going to be teams that are going to say like, that's a small sample size. You've been in the league for 9 years. Like, here's what the objective truth says about you. You had a good 2 months. Congratulations. Like, so like the way like it's used kind of on both sides is still like something that's very much like up for debate amongst players. But I really enjoyed you taking us in this book into kind of the behind the scenes, the way like, yes, you can, as a player, you can have a breakout year where you put up better numbers than you have, and it can truly be determined like that you are improving if you look at all of these other metrics that go along with it. Like you mentioned, exit velocity, launch angle, on base, like barrels is a thing now that I don't fully understand yet. But like there is other, like, I don't know, you hit it hard, but like only like certain ways can you get a barrel. I don't know.
It's within the launch angle spread. I'm like trying to like, if this is all launch angles, then it's the best, the optimal range, and it has
10
to have
33.
Yeah, something like that. But it changes, right? The harder you hit it, the wider the range. So I just try. We're definitely putting a little faith in the MLB guys. Like, okay, they said it's good, but there's an interplay between exit velocity and launch angle. But what's interesting is if you look at the barrels leaderboards in terms of like barrels per batted ball event or barrels per PA, it also lines up with some visual observations too. It's like, well, those are the guys who make the hardest contact. Joey Gallo is always at the top. Right. He doesn't make a lot of contact, but when he does, it's extremely hard. It's all those guys you basically expect to see, and a few surprises, which I always sort of enjoy to see. Oh, that guy's
He's one of the most intimidating guys in the box. So like anybody that wants to like point to his low batting average, like you are more than welcome to try to face him.
Oh, I bet. Right. And you even have you have the platoon advantage against him. I can imagine like right-handed. It's like, I'm going to throw into that path. But
it's still not fun. But it's just to say, like, the numbers don't lie, unfortunately. Like, you could be a reliever that puts up an ERA under 3, but like players now are being evaluated by more than just those stats on the back of your baseball card.
Yep.
And you can't hide as much anymore. Like it used to be like the film doesn't lie, and now there's like a bunch of other stuff. And I think like fans are getting smarter, like, and they're starting to be able to see through some of that stuff. And I think it's cool that we have a fan base that wants to learn and think along those lines. And that's I enjoyed learning about it in this book.
One thing I want to add too is like I personally find evaluating relievers extremely difficult, like because of the small sample size. Not because
I find being a reliever extremely difficult.
I bet you do.
I appreciate that.
Yes, I bet. I think your part of this is more difficult than my part. But like I've definitely backed away from having, like I'm asked to give opinions on players and evaluations of players all the time, and it's so much more. It's a personal confidence level. Like with starters, we have so much more of a body of work within a single season, to go on. But with relievers, because like I was saying earlier, because of how you're used, you're often asked to pitch so often on many days in a row. And then yet because your body of work within a season often is only 50 or 60 innings. I mean, I say only, but in terms of like working out some of just the randomness of the one bad outing, you have bad outing the last week of April, and it can bring your ERA up for the whole season, right? But noticeably so for the whole season. That I've tried to become a lot more cautious about having like really strong opinions on relievers and thinking in terms of projecting them, because I recognize too, I get fooled by the randomness in those small samples just as easily as everybody else does. It's just harder when you guys don't pitch that much. It doesn't make your job less important. It just means it's harder to interpret the little data that is coming back at us. And it's why maybe the StatCast or TrackMan style data is even more valuable, because at least we can look at the underlying characteristics and not get quite as fooled by the randomness. Like as I said, like I often do when it comes to looking at relievers.
Right. Like so much of it depends on, work usage levels. Have you pitched 2 out of the last 3? Have you pitched 4 out of the last 6? So the different situations in the game you're coming into with guys on base, without guys on base. Obviously, it'll be interesting to see how the 3 batter rule affects a lot of this stuff. But
I'd love to hear what you think about that as a reliever who would, like, you don't often come in and just face 1 or 2 batters, but you could.
I have done it in my career. I've pitched in a bunch of different roles, and I don't know what the numbers say about my platoon splits, but like I think with the exception of last year, I had done a pretty good job of getting righties out, and I'm good enough that teams let me pitch in the closer role as a lefty. So like, but like I'm trying to keep an open mind about the 3 batter rule. I don't like it. I think like as like being competitive, if we have a chance to like play the matchups late in games and have a chance to win, like I think if we have those guys available in our bullpen and we've constructed our roster a certain way, like we should be able to use those guys to play the matchups and try to win the game. And I don't necessarily think it's something that might speed up the game or improve the pace of the game the way that it was kind of pitched to us as. You start having, guys that you can tell right away sometimes with a reliever, right? Like you put this guy in and the first batter, you're like, he doesn't have it. Like he doesn't have it. And you send the catcher out for a meeting, you get somebody warming in the pen. And as a reliever, like, it too, like you can tell the way that like that guy just swung at that pitch, and you immediately catch the ball back from the catcher, you turn around, you're looking at the bullpen, you're like, they should probably get somebody going. And like, and like now it's like, all right, you got to figure out a way to get through these first 3 hitters without costing your team the game, and without giving up the lead. Next thing you know, these guys have gotten on base. You have to bring somebody else in. He's coming into a mess. And as a reliever, like that's not ideal, right? Coming in with guys on base.
Right.
And for a team like Pandora's box has kind of been opened. Anything can happen now. There's bad juju. I know this isn't something you can measure, but like there's bad energy swirling around. And you're trying to put a stop to
negative
it.
chi.
Yeah, there's no metric for that yet, but it's like, next thing you know, they've put up a crooked number and the game's taken 4 hours because like neither team had guys, they just had to wear it. And
Yep.
I don't know, like, but I don't know. I'm trying to keep an open mind. Right now, I would welcome baseball back.
Right. Any way we could
and
get it.
yeah. So
That's how I feel too.
I'm not going to be picky.
Yeah.
So it'll be
I
interesting.
I keep thinking how at this point, like there were already college series I had sketched, like marked on the calendar. I'm going to be in Nashville this week. Actually, Nashville was a couple of weekends from now. And I already had my bookstore picked out where I was going to go in each of these cities too. And my coffee shop that I was going to go to, like, I can't get over that it's late April and like, I haven't seen draft players and I haven't gone to, I had a list. Like it is hard. Like, I don't think I've actually quite internalized it. Like, I'm not seeing any more players this spring for the draft. Like that has become such a part of my life for 13 years now. I have not quite gotten adjusted to, oh no, they're not going to play. This pitcher is an hour and a quarter from me up in Pennsylvania, who I was like, home game. This is great. I don't get a lot of home games here. And nope, not going to see him this year. Yeah. It's like, I just haven't quite accepted that. I guess at some point I'll have to. I'm still holding out hope we get baseball like sooner, maybe like June or so rather than later, as long as it's safe for you guys, especially.
Right.
But I'm still holding out hope. Right. And like you, I'll take it back any way we can get
it. Yeah.
We should talk a little what you're reading, and especially I know you've got a huge interest in sci-fi and fantasy, and I'm always following what you tweet about too. And so I'll ask first, like, what are you reading right now?
I am reading Sailing to Sarantium by Guy Gavriel Kay. If anybody, Guy Gavriel Kay, he is one of my favorite authors. He writes a lot of fantasy fiction, but it almost feels like historical fiction because it so closely mirrors like ancient like Rome, that like it has like a lot of substance to it, and I really, really like it. I started with A Brightness Long Ago, came out last summer, I believe, and it's one of my favorite books I've ever read. So I've read a couple of his other ones, and I just finished the King Killer Chronicle, book 1 and 2, Name of the Wind, and Wise Man's Fear, which I was putting off because of how long they were. They're long books.
Yes,
they're long books. But they were much more, like, they were so easy to read and they were so good that like I flew through them, and I absolutely loved it. They were some of my favorite books I've ever read.
Oh, that's awesome. When he spoke at I go to Gen Con every year, the Massive Board Gaming Convention. They have a writers thing. When he was speaking, I actually didn't know who he was at the time because this was right around when the first book had come out. And I'm walking down the hall, like to go to the exhibit hall. And there is a line, like, a half a mile long of people waiting to go hear someone. I'm like, who's that? What? Who is there? A celebrity here? It's like, that's for Patrick Rothfuss. And I'm like, I don't know who that is, but that like not long afterwards, like, oh, that guy.
Yeah.
I don't know if you saw, I tweeted at you after you mentioned Frida. They company made the
they made
talk.
A game.
I played it. I had like a demo version. I don't have the actual like inbox version. They sent me a sample, and it's like, it's good. It's hard. It's very abstract. It's a little chess-like, and I suck at chess, but it's clever.
It seems
like they really did a nice job.
The description in the book. But, I see people in the comments about having to wait for the third book, and it's like, I would trust. I went right from 1 to book 2 like the very same day, and I would obviously love to have been able to jump right into the third one, but they were so good. I loved them so much. I will wait for you, Patrick. I will wait, because I know it will be worth it.
I'm just about to finish. This is an old book, The Falcon and the Snowman, which is an old nonfiction book about 2 kids, really kids. They were like early 20s in California. One of them worked at a defense contractor, and the 2 of them worked together and sold secrets to the Soviets. And it became a pretty big movie with Sean Penn. I forgot who played the other guy, like right in the mid 80s or so. And I remember, it's the weirdest thing because I know of it because when I was in high school, that movie was on TV all the time, like on WPIX in New York, constantly. And when I happened to see it, like in a used bookstore a while ago, it was like, oh, that book, the movie. And I love anything spy related. I'm total sucker for that. And so I grabbed that. And then the next, wanted to ask you specifically, have you read any Octavia Butler? Because I have not. And I got The Parable of the Sower, which I understand is one of her best. So it's literally next to my queue after this one.
Parable of the Sower, and it's actually a duology. Parable of the Talents is a sequel.
Oh, awesome!
And I really, really liked them. It's very dystopian. But that's right in my wheelhouse.
Yeah, mine too.
I loved it. Falcon and the Snowman, by the way, sounds like a metal band name.
Right? Yes.
That would be a sick metal band name.
Yeah.
The Falcon and the Snowman.
That actually sounds very like I'm picturing like Bay Area thrash, like throwback. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Yeah. So like, it's funny because Octavia Butler's one, like I've read so much sci-fi. I was huge into sci-fi as a kid. When I remember seeing Isaac Asimov's Foundation in a bookstore, Walden Books in Smith Haven Mall. The mall is there. The bookstore is long gone. And I read it and I was like, I don't know what this is, but I need all the books now, and just kept buying that series. There's like 15 books in the extended universe of it. I read them all. And then got out of it for a while until, I don't know, maybe somewhere between the last 5 and 10 years. It's like, do I just not read this because I think it's nerdy? I'm a big nerd. Like, I can read these books. I think it's okay.
You're right.
And
just
now
lean into it.
Right? Exactly.
Like,
yes.
That's all I did. Like,
I think it's worked for you.
It,
yeah.
You know, like, and I'm relatively new to that genre. Like, a friend of mine recommended the Broken Earth series by N.K. Jemisin.
Yeah.
And that
she's brilliant.
Opened up like a whole world to me. And N.K. Jemisin credits Octavia Butler to connect all these dots with influencing her writing and weaving in messages of social justice and inequality into fantasy fiction. So even though it is very much happening in a fantasy world, it's a lot of it mirrors a lot of stuff. So which I like, because it makes me think about things differently, while also like not like it's disconnected enough that it's not like I'm reading, it's happening on my Twitter feed. Like I'm still thinking about things differently and learning, because even though it's fantasy fiction, is very much shaped by their personal experiences and what's happened to them.
Yep. And what I found about the Broken Earth trilogy too, first of all, her world building is absolutely incredible, but
unbelievable.
There's so few women of color writing in science fiction, and that like the way she incorporated those very social justice themes and a lot about, the equivalent of racism in the world that she created was so compelling to me, because of course it's foreign to my experience. And also, like, I know I haven't read maybe enough works by women of color that are addressing those themes. So she did all of that, but did it in a setting that, of course, very familiar to me. Any of these sci-fi and sort of, it's kind of dystopian. It's very dark. Like my mental images of reading the book, it's like, there's not a lot of sunlight in her world, huh? It's kind of dark.
No, it's always overcast.
Right?
There's always lightning in the distance.
Yes. Yeah. She's got a new book coming, or series coming soon, and just
her new book, The City We Became, came out. Within the last couple of weeks.
Okay, perfect. I need to get that on my list of stuff to buy, because
it's supposed to be really good. I haven't started it yet.
Oh yeah, it's the one where like the cities are alive, right? I think the cities are actually alive.
Something like that. Yeah. She called it her love letter. She called it her love letter to New York City, which is where she lives now. So it's supposed to be set in modern day New York, I believe, with a real sci-fi fantasy twist to it.
Oh, it sounds awesome. So, hello, Beth.
Hi, Beth.
We see you.
It says you're on mute.
You're muted. Oh, somebody approves of the N.K. Jemisin book too.
So sorry, y'all. Am I back?
You're back.
Hey. This has been lovely listening to you talk about books. if everybody looks in the chat, we're putting PMP links to any of the ones that you all are talking about. We've got 34 questions in the Q&A, and we're running a little low on time, so I'm hoping I can ask you two a couple of questions before we wrap up tonight. Okay, cool.
Sure.
So this first one is from Kathleen, and they say, I believe it's addressed to Keith, but I kind of want to hear Sean's take on it as well. She says, I followed and enjoyed your ratings of prospects for years. Can you talk about how you assess them and give an example of a player who turned out to be a success and who you appreciated more than conventional wisdom suggested you should? And I'm also kind of interested in maybe how this plays out for you, Sean. Maybe somebody caught your eye in a way in spring training that didn't catch others. So
how do I assess players? I have tried as much as possible, and I'm not going to pretend I have the perfect formula, but I try to incorporate traditional scouting methods, which I learned just over years of working alongside scouts at the Blue Jays, and then just following them as a writer and asking a lot of questions, and then also just watching guys and putting opinions out there and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes, but then also combining it with what we could get from statistics. And that's become, and actually statistics, I should say now, more analytics, because we have other types of data than just performance statistics. And trying to find the perfect way to marry the two is like a never-ending task. It's something I enjoy, the fact that I'll never quite get it right, but there's always a learning process to sort of continue improving. And, as for the second part of the question, I always hesitate to ask that because it sounds like I'm bragging maybe about getting a player right. And it's like, no, let's talk about the guys that got wrong. It's way more interesting to talk about, like, why I thought Chris Sale was going to break down, which I guess I should say, well, he did break down 10 years later. Let's not talk about that. But, it could be guys like Andrew McCutchen, who was just an underperformer. He was a first rounder, but he didn't perform all that well in the minors. And I had some questions about how he was handled as a prospect, but believed in the bat speed, and he just had ridiculous strength that you could see from his wrists to his forearms that was kind of exceptional for a guy who's not that big. He said he's going to have the bat speed and the strength, the impact, the quality impact that would be needed to hit for power. And even a guy like Brian Reynolds, who had both Brian Reynolds and Kevin Newman kind of had breakout years last year. Prospects I rated much more highly in their draft years than where they were drafted. I don't know that either guy's going to be a star necessarily, but that they made it and had some success. When that happens, I just feel better about the initial evaluation, that I saw something that I thought would make this guy worthy of a first-round pick, and that it eventually did pan out, that he at least had some success in the majors. So I feel like I was at least somewhat justified. Because when a guy like that doesn't pan out, that's the biggest soul searching for me, where did I go wrong in the evaluation process? And was this, and just to try to prevent myself from making the same kind of mistake again.
Mm-hmm. Awesome. There is a question for you, Sean, that I really do want to make sure it gets asked. Peggy asks, what other Nats players, if any, are big readers? And there's a second part. If you were to write a novel, who among your teammates would be the most interesting character?
Oh man, I'm trying to think of readers on our team. There aren't very many guys that I can talk books with. Strauss was reading Devil in the White City by Eric Larson last year, which, as someone that lives in Chicago now, is one of my favorite books. I don't read much nonfiction, but I love that one. They are very interested in like my bookstore adventures, because so oftentimes when we're in road cities and I'm exploring, looking for an independent bookstore, it takes me pretty far off the beaten path, at least in a different part of the city than something that is on the route, maybe from the hotel to the stadium. So they want to know, like, where'd you go today? And like, even though they're not asking about like the bookstore, they want to know, like, was that a cool area of the town city? Like, is there like a breakfast or coffee shop I can go to? But they are, they have accepted me as the team's resident nerd, which I'm very appreciative of. And then as far as who would be the most interesting character? Was that the question?
Yeah. In a
our
book that
clubhouse?
you write, yeah.
Para, probably. He's not still on the team, but
Baby Shark.
The story would be about the 2019 team, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
He would be one of the most interesting characters for sure. I think he was another thing we haven't quite been able to quantify is the way players have an impact on the clubhouse, and I firmly believe that he had an undeniably positive impact for us last year.
I think we would all read that book, frankly. I'll ask one more. I'm so sorry to all of these questions, but a lot of them were answered by y'all in your conversation. But one last one is, how have you all been? Well, it's specifically for Sean, asking how the quarantine has affected your job specifically. Are you like Zooming with the team or anything? But I would love to hear a little bit more from both of you of how your jobs right now are being affected by current situations.
Well, for me and for players everywhere, the challenge is to try to stay somewhat ready so that if and when we do get the green light, we're not starting from scratch. We are going to have a spring training 2.0, hopefully at some point. But even the length of that is still up for debate right now. We've heard everything as short as 2 weeks up to a month. So we have to stay somewhat ready, but without the resources that we normally have during an off season. Gyms are closed. Most pitchers don't have access to mounds to be able to do mound work. So I've been improvising a lot around my house. The strength coaches with the Nats and the trainers have been in very close contact with us almost on a daily basis, sending us ideas for home workouts and videos, stuff we can do at home. I do have some equipment, so I'm able to improvise some stuff, but a lot of it is like using the railing to on my patio to anchor a resistance band to do something, or using the back steps on the patio for like step ups and step downs and lunges. And I have a net in my side yard that I can set up to throw into. So I've been able to improvise a throwing program and, get the camera out I've been working a lot on my front leg after last year with some of the knee issues that I had. I developed some pretty bad habits and trying to iron a lot of that out and, work on my delivery and I really just like trying to improvise. And there's a group message thread on our phones with the relievers that we exchange ideas and stuff on too. So but some days it's kind of fun trying to put something together at home. Other days it's kind of grindy and you can't wait to get back, but we're staying ready.
We'd love to hear that.
I feel like a good portion of my job is like I'm waiting for games. A huge part of what I do for The Athletic and what I did for ESPN was go see players and write about them, prospects, particularly for the draft or in the minors. So what we've all tried to do at The Athletic now is we're coming up with other stories that obviously don't involve going to games, profiling players, or just did a couple of pieces on how scouts view the different categories on scouting reports. And, Cyrus wrote the other half. Well, how can we talk about these things with StatCast style data? So we're doing that to try to stay busy as much as possible. It's not always easy to motivate when it's like, no, I go to games. It's what I do, right? I want to go see the players and, but we're just trying to keep enough content going so that it doesn't feel like a total interruption. And with the hope, obviously, at some point we get baseball back and we can all resume going out to see players. And I mean, in a way, I was kind of fortunate to have this happen, to have the book come out when it did. I don't know what the shutdown will do to sales necessarily, but I've been very busy the last few days. Actually, it's been a great distraction. I haven't actually done any writing for The Athletic in 3 or 4 days, but I've been doing all of, things like this. I did a ton of podcasts this week and stuff, and that's been fun. And it's great to like talk to so many people again and get to talk a little bit about baseball. And other than the constant questions I get asked about when baseball's coming back, I don't actually know.
Sure.
But other than that, it's really fun to at least have these things to talk about, to have something we can all kind of gather together and discuss.
Absolutely. And I mean, from the chat and the questions this evening, I think that is exactly what people want to do. We, in the absence of baseball, we want to get together and we want to talk about baseball if we can't watch it. And so we thank you so much, Sean and Keith, for this really excellent evening. And I want to thank everybody who came tonight, who bought the book, who will buy the book from Politics and Prose. Your patronage is what lets PNP put on these kinds of events. We need the book sales to support them, and we got a ton from tonight, and so we thank you so much. If you want extra copies of The Inside Game by Keith Law, there is a big green button down there. If you want to get in on all of the excellent sci-fi recommendations that these two guys gave you tonight, that's all in the chat. Visit PNP. We've got them. We will send them to you. Thank you so much. You can follow PNP by hitting the button up, the follow button up in the top of your screen. It'll let you know whenever we're having another event like this. And we just want you to stay well read. Happy birthday, Abby. And thank you so much, guys. Have a good night. Happy Friday.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you, guys.
Take care, y'all.